Peter, a very good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. As it's a lovely summer's day out there.
Yes, feeling of autumn in the air.
There is,
which I find exhilarating.
As long as it's
autumn.
sunny, I'm actually very happy with the world, and I don't particularly like it to be too hot. I was just up in Edinburgh where it was positively wintry.
So people don't realise how lucky they are to have this climate.
Yeah.
The places where it's constantly hot and humid.
Right.
Washington DC this time of year, you just had to hide.
Oh my God! I was once there for a concert on July the 4th. I went down to see. You probably remember Maggie Hall. Went to her house, which was around the back of Capitol Hill, and it was so oppressive. And you were literally just drenched in sweat
it's like
all the time.
It's walking through soup. You have to have about 5 showers a day. It's awful. And the swimming pool's closed because of the thunderstorms. You can't even swim. I would not recommend it. People should not complain about the British climate.
No.
It's
and
really,
let's face it,
really
last year when it was incredibly hot, it was just not suitable for this country because not enough air conditioning. There's, the shops. I mean, even yesterday coming back from Edinburgh Airport, standing in Edinburgh Airport with a bit of a hangover and watching the world go by, I was sitting there kind of going, oh.
Yes, but make all forms of weather seem worse when you have a bit of a hangover. You can't visit your own problems.
Very true. Well, we'll talk more about Edinburgh later, but talk to us about the column this week. Meet the Liberals who condemned Trump's failed putsch but happily condone a real one.
Well, it's extraordinary that we have people quite rightly are outraged about what appears to have been an attempt to frustrate the democratic will of the American people in January 2021.
Yes.
And people have actually gone to jail for it, as I understand it.
People have gone to jail.
It's deeply disapproved of. Every liberal-minded person deeply disapproves of it. Now, I'm not a Donald Trump supporter, and this is nothing to do for me with Donald Trump or not. It's a simple rule. If you believe, and I think we have accepted in modern societies, that the way in which we choose our governments is a democratic vote, then you have to respect it.
Yeah.
If Trump did do what he's accused of doing, and if those people were trying to prevent the installation of a properly elected President Biden, then they were frustrating that will. They were undermining the rule of law. They were undermining the whole idea of constitutional representative government. And therefore it was a terrible thing. Right. Okay, so we all agree on that's so.
Yes.
Any civilized person, liberal or conservative,
I don't know whether... I don't think it's worth necessarily arguing about in terms of the niceties of what actually happened, but for me, partly it depends upon how organised it was and whether it was a kind of a spur-of-the-moment type...
Well, just imagine, had it succeeded, all kinds of things which are spur-of-the-moment things actually end up changing the world. And so if it had the Lenin putsch in Petrograd in 1917 changed the course of history. It was a very small number of people and actually surprisingly non-violent. It's huge. That Eisenstein film about 1917 is completely untrue. It portrays a huge sort of revolution uprising of the people. Nothing of the kind. Very small numbers of people can change history by that kind of thing, and defy the democratic and constitutional will. I think that's evil. I think we have to be against it. Okay.
I think we have to be against it, but what I'm saying is, I suppose, that whether you attribute it to something called a putsch or something called an organised, rebellion...
Well, putsch is a word.
Does it not depend on whether it's organised?
I would say any unconstitutional, lawless and violent overthrow of the democratic will of a properly constituted government and the democratic will of a properly conducted election is fundamentally wrong and to be disapproved of. Okay, and so everybody disapproves of this in the instance of the supposed Trumpoid takeover in Washington in January 2021. Far, far more significant in the history of the world is the successful coup d'etat against the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, in February 2014. There's no question it was illegal. There's no question it was violent. 2 attempts, very serious attempts, were made, and this is recorded both by Serhiy Plokhy, the very much pro-Ukrainian historian, and by Richard Sakwa, who's more sceptical on that side. But both their histories of the events will show that the attempts were made, quite serious attempts were made, by Yanukovych to broker a peace deal with the Ukrainian opposition, which would involve early elections. And these attempts were twice. This is Plokhy is very good on this in his new book on the Ukraine war. These attempts were twice frustrated by demonstrators. Once they set fire to and destroyed Yanukovych's party headquarters, and the second time they basically came to the centre of Kiev, and they met the European Union foreign ministers who'd broken the deal and said, "We're not accepting this. and Yanukovych must go, and if he doesn't go, then violence will follow. And so that was the point at which Yanukovych left his seat of government. He was still in Ukraine. This is also another thing which Plocky is very good on. He was still in Ukraine when the Ukrainian parliament then broke its own rules. There is a clear procedure for impeachment of the president in the Ukrainian constitution,
which they didn't follow.
It requires all kinds of steps being taken, which they did not take. I won't go through them all, but you could look it all up. And then they held a vote in which they did not get the requisite number of votes to do so. Now that happened in Congress. If Congress held an impeachment of President Biden, and
they did it with Trump, didn't they?
But if they held an impeachment for President Biden and it failed to reach the required majority, and also they didn't follow the set lawful procedures of the Constitution, then nobody would say, oh, well, that's all right then. Biden was a silly old fool. He should go. Now, Yanukovych, I have no defender of Yanukovych. He was a very bad president and doesn't seem to me to be a very nice man. The fact was, however, that beyond doubt, nobody disputes this. He was fairly elected in 2010. So a fairly elected national president was removed by a mixture of illegality and violence. And this was the beginning, really, of the whole Ukrainian crisis. And what followed, the illegal occupation of Crimea and everything else that's happened, the long undeclared war in the east.
Nothing was done about any of that.
And the fascinating thing was the reaction of the Obama White House, which was basically sympathetic, the reaction of the American ambassador in Kiev, which was basically sympathetic, and the reaction of the then William Hague, now Lord Hague, of Richmond, who was our Foreign Secretary, who told the House of Commons that the necessary majorities had been obtained, which is incorrect, and also said there was no reason.
Was he misinformed?
There was no reason. I believe he was misinformed. I've written to him about this, and he broke off the correspondence.
Oh, really?
Yes, because I showed beyond doubt that he had been mistaken, and he didn't seem to be prepared to discuss this or admit it. But I have taken great care. I'm not saying any of this lightly. I thought it was essential before I said this to approach Lord Hague and say, this is what actually happened. What do you say about it? And his response was to answer the first letter. The second letter came back from his own official address with a sticker on it saying, not at this address.
Oh, really?
I'm not making this up.
That's
a sticker on it saying, not at this address. So that was the end of that. But I should stress here that I have used every conceivable journalistic method to contact Lord Hague about this and get him to explain himself, and he honestly, it's been very frustrating. But here we are. So we have two major governments. I haven't been able to trace the exact statement issued by the European Union at the time, but I don't think they condemned it either. We have
they wanted Ukraine to join.
But what they wanted is one thing. These are all democratic bodies which claim to be in support of the rule of law and representative government and fair elections and people coming to power through such elections. And here is somebody overthrown by non-democratic, non-lawful means, and what do they say? Nothing. I'm sorry, but this, apart from anything else, this may well be the most significant event in European history since Sarajevo, the assassination.
Well, let's not forget it's still going on.
Franz Ferdinand. Well, the conflict which really began at that point, the undeclared war in eastern Ukraine, in which many people died, then the illegal seizure of Crimea by Vladimir Putin, and then
the continuing occupation.
What we now have all stems from this event. And I think it should really is time. I'm amazed at my media colleagues. They're just not interested. And here's nothing. It's like George Orwell's 1984. When four legs good, two legs bad. Everybody has to chant this not 1984, Animal Farm, where all the animals have to chant 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and then when the pigs learn to walk on their hind legs, it's 4 legs good, 2 legs better. And everybody changes their mind overnight on a crucial issue without showing any sign whatsoever of changing their mind. If you're against putches, if you're against illegal takeovers of power, if you think the Trump supporters' attack on the Capitol building was wrong, then you have to think the same thing about what happened in Kiev in February 2014. And so why don't you?
And they don't make the
case. Because you're not thinking.
But they don't make the case either as to why not, or why there is a difference, or why they believe one thing but don't believe another thing. They just don't say anything.
Well,
right?
they say things like Yanukovych was a terrible president, which I can see. They say Yanukovych fled from Ukraine, which is irrelevant because he believed himself to be in physical danger, and he was quite reasonable for him to depart from Kiev. But he was still.
Well, they say that
he was still in Ukraine.
Well, they say that as if it proves that he left of his own accord.
He was still in Ukraine. I think, if I remember from Plocky's book, I think he was in Crimea, which was still in Ukraine at the time that the Parliament voted with an inadequate majority to remove him.
Yeah.
And the Constitution simply was not followed. Well, this isn't good enough. And also, here is another crucial point in this. He offered early elections, which would, if what you thought was, if you thought that Yanukovych needed to be removed, and if you thought he was deeply unpopular and would be thrown out, then here was an opportunity to do it in a constitutional fashion. Why not accept that?
Yes.
Is it possible that the Ukrainian opposition were not confident they'd win those elections?
Very possible.
It seems to be quite an important consideration to wonder about. But again, all I want about this, and this is an opportunity.
It may even be that they didn't believe that they had enough, not only enough votes, but perhaps that he was too strong to remove. In either case,
it's possible.
In either case, it's worth an argument.
But
isn't it?
here is the thing: the response of major democratic, constitutional, lawful governments to this event was, let's put it at its absolute best, it was complacent.
Yes.
There was no condemnation. Now, why was that? And again, why aren't people interested? And why, when I approached the most significant politician involved in that issue at the time, does he break off correspondence with me rather than continue?
We're talking about the Ascension Islands this morning on the show, because apparently there's a suggestion that if Rwanda all falls apart, don't worry, we've got another plan. We're going to send them to Ascension Island. By them, of course, we mean the illegal migrants. Peter Hitchens is here. You've been to Ascension Island. I have,
twice.
A couple of times.
Yeah.
Was it on the way and on the way back?
It was on the way out. I went with the late George Younger, a lovely man who was Secretary of State for Defence from the era when we still had people who were in politics. He'd taken part in war, and had been wounded, and he took a press party
estimable characters
out to the Falkland Islands, and we flew in quite a big jet, but we had to stop at Ascension for a refuelling stop. Very rocky, is what I would say. I'm not sure it's going to be easy to create flat land to put people on, but I only had a brief glimpse, because what happened as the plane came in, especially on the plane on the way back from Port Stanley, as it actually came in and began the approach, they put over the public address, because this is an RAF flight, there's nothing to drink on it.
Right.
So, will passengers please not break into a run as they approach the bar?
Right.
They told them you get out of there, walk in a decorous fashion towards the bar.
Absolutely.
And what most people were concerned about with Ascension was to quickly get to the bar and have a drink before they stayed.
And is it I mean, stupid question, but is it cold? Is it chilly, windy? It
seemed quite warm and windy. Right. Rough seas visible.
Yes.
As I recall.
Because I was told it's quite a difficult place to land a plane on.
I think you would need to be good at it, but I think they've redone the runway, haven't they?
Yes, apparently so.
It was very important to get these things. They had wasn't it? Is it St Helena where they had runway problems because
that's the one? Yeah, because I remember reading about a runway being fixed.
Yeah,
because St Helena I think is more difficult.
They built it in some way that actually made the wind shear danger greater, but certainly we didn't have any great problems. It's a very secret military zone as well. I think it's where they they watch the fall of the test Trident missile warhead.
Right.
So it's
and is it a military base of some kind?
It felt very strongly military. Yes, I mean there was almost everything about it was military, except for the bar. Well, I suppose it was a military bar. But
well, there's always a bar in the military, isn't there?
But I said it was very rocky. I didn't see much all that much in the way of vegetation, and not.
But quite a long way away to fly people to. I mean, I wonder if
it was a long way to get there.
If you were going to end up going there, I wonder whether that would be enough to put people off coming here.
It's just one of those ideas, isn't it? What everybody wants to do is to repeat what the Australians did.
Yes.
I think, but
they have land a lot further away as well.
They do, and it's also by agreement with the governments of those countries. And I just don't think we have anything remotely like that.
No.
And I think who knows? Never say never. but I would be surprised.
Well, the Conservative
if
Party
it
sort
happens.
of government playbook now is so laughable that it's almost as though they just pick something up out of it and go, why don't we say, let's send them there?
Yeah, but maybe one day they'll crack it. I don't know.
By accident, I think.
Well, perhaps, yeah.
I don't think they're going to do anything
Things
willfully.
are often cracked by accident. You saw the other day somebody had come up with what sounded like a really good way of preventing malaria by accident.
Right.
A lot of good things come by accident. So maybe it will.
Well,
but
listen.
Ascension Island, I mean, it was, I recommend the bar.
Okay, very good. Well, let's talk a bit about Nobby Pilcher.
Nobby
a name
Pilcher.
that appeared in your column this week, a 1960 drug squad copper.
Yeah, Nobby was...
It's a great name.
Yeah, Norman properly, but Nobby, he became known as Nobby. He arrested almost everybody in the days when the police still arrested people for drug possession. Almost all the big rock star arrests were led by Nobby, who later got into terrible trouble for falsifying evidence. In fact, he had emigrated to Australia. Oh, well, I mean, I have to say, it always seemed to me to be slightly odd that of all the people in the whole of the Metropolitan Police who got done for falsifying evidence, it was him.
It was him,
What the heck?
Right.
Maybe it really was that rare. But he actually emigrated to Australia, and when he arrived in Australia, they took him off the boat and flew him back.
Right. Oh, really? So he was extradited, effectively?
Well, I think there was a sort of feeling that maybe that they wanted to give the impression that he fled the country, which he hadn't. He decided to emigrate already. But leaving that aside, he did a little... My Mrs. Hitchens was a criminal lawyer, and he did a little bit of work for the firm that she then worked for, including, because he ran a driving school, teaching their staff to drive, and so she benefited from the Nobby Pilcher driving school, and it was quite unorthodox. There was one lesson which was actually called How to Cut Up a London Taxi, which gives you an indication of the kind of driving he was teaching, and then more practical and theoretical. It came in very handy when we moved to Moscow, and Mrs. Hitchens had to drive the Volvo around the streets of that city, which in those days, the basic principle of Soviet traffic is that everybody is the enemy.
Yes.
And you...
Well, New York was a bit like that. You're
the Germans. And it was pretty... I got rammed, I think my third time out, I got rammed on the ring road by a Soviet lorry.
Right.
Which made the car look...
because you were in the way.
Well, something like that. Made the car look as if it had been the Battle of Jutland, but actually it was still drivable, which was a good thing, because Soviet insurance took ages to pay. We could not get it fixed, and so she drove around with her Nobby Pilcher skills in this wreck, and they after a while they learned to give her a wide berth. We were always grateful.
Yeah, New York was the same. There was no point in having a decent car. You just had an old car that you could park, because there was a great race in the morning.
I had to say, a car with a badly twisted wing is best of all, because people think you've got nothing.
People stay well out of the way. Also, you talk about the run to the bar. We used to have the run to the car in New York in the mornings, where they would come and clean one side of the street. So you'd have to move it from one side of the street to the other.
They cleaned the streets? They
did. I mean, it wasn't any point, because they weren't any cleaner when they finished.
No.
But they used to come, particularly in the summer. And my girlfriend at the time used to say, when it rains in New York, it makes soup in the street.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And you'd have to get up and move the car from the left-hand side of the street to the right-hand side of the street before everybody else did.
Well, these days, of course, it would make marijuana-flavoured soup.
It probably
the air is so full of dope fumes now.
But there we are. Let's talk about Julian Assange. We're talking about people being deported.
I think it's just astonishing. Here we are with this poor man imprisoned endlessly. I mean, he's not really...
How long has he been in now?
I can't remember.
Must be years, right?
Ages.
Years.
And the thing, he's long ago served the sentence which was imposed on him for jumping bail. He's basically there now because he is... they won't allow him out on bail because of the extradition threat which lies over him. And I suppose you could say that's reasonable. He has skipped bail. They can't really let him go free. But why he has to be in Belmarsh, in the most oppressive prison conditions pretty much in the country, I'm not sure. But in any case, I just think, I've looked at this extradition. There are many things about it which are very worrying. One of them being basically no journalist is safe if this extradition goes ahead. Yeah. There's a clear statement in the extradition treaty between us and the United States that no political extradition should take place. I don't think there's any doubt that this is a political extradition. It simply shouldn't be happening. But it's grinding on, and at some point, maybe very soon there's going to be an announcement that Julian Assange has been shoved on a plane and sent to the United States. Well,
and this is all back to the WikiLeaks days, right? This is all going back to WikiLeaks, which was a long time ago as well.
But he could be imprisoned in some federal dungeon for the rest of his life.
Right.
This is a man with a wife and young children who has committed, as far as I can see, no crime under the laws of this country. And I just would ask people, if they're at all concerned about this, and there are things said about Julian Assange endangering Western people which are very much challenged by his supporters. Yeah. I'm no friend of Julian Assange.
I'm not.
The last time we encountered each other was at a debate on drugs where we were very rude to each other. Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Right.
He should have justice and freedom. So if you feel able to write to the Right On Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary. I'll give you the address here if you wouldn't mind.
Yes. We'll post it up as we speak as well.
At the Home Office, which is 2 Marsham Street, and it's London SW1P and 4DF, and ask her not to permit this extradition. Please be polite, because rudeness is of no help. Please be brief, and I would say above all, please be numerous.
Yes.
Actually, these things, Theresa May, to the surprise of everybody, halted the extradition of unfair in a different way of Gary McKinnon some years ago.
Yes.
It is within her power to do it, and I think if people ask nicely in large enough numbers, it might happen.
And
the very certain thing is, if you do nothing, it's much more likely to go ahead.
Is he now currently being held in lieu of that extradition? I.e., if they say, well, we're not going to extradite him, would he then be freed?
If she cancelled the extradition, he would then be freed. The only reason, as far as I can see, he's being held is because they're afraid of a flight risk while he awaits extradition. As soon as the extradition threat is lifted, then I believe he would then be free. He'd be able to get together with his wife and children again.
Right.
There's lots of material on the web about these accusations against him, which many of which people have believed. But I promise you, the case for him being taken off to the United States is extremely weak, and it's very dangerous indeed to press freedom and freedom of speech in general if it goes ahead.
Interesting. Final story, front of the Telegraph today, NatWest limits access to cash for certain customers. This on the top of what we've already seen NatWest and Coots doing and other banking groups admitting, which is basically that they may make a judgment upon your fitness to have a bank account based on what you might be saying on social media. They've all admitted it now, basically. They've said, well, somebody would have to complain. Well, anybody could complain about you, and they would look into your bank account.
Didn't we all used to laugh at the French peasants who kept money under the mattress or in safes under the floor? But now I don't, because it seems to me they have their heads screwed on. Governments should not be interfering anything like so much in such a basic activity as paying for the goods that you bought, which is a fundamental freedom. If once you are not allowed to have cash, every transaction you undertake becomes actually effectively under surveillance.
Digital.
And also stoppable by all some officials. If someone can cancel your bank account or debank you, they can also, by throwing a similar switch, just say, well, sorry, we're not making your payments, leaving you completely. I mean, there is someone in this country at the moment who's under sanctions, to whom this has more or less happened. The extraordinary case of Graham Phillips, which I'll come back to some other time. But it basically means you cannot live. Now, in France, there is an absolute law that traders, restaurants, shops, hotels have to accept cash. They're not allowed to refuse it. And cash in that country is still very much respected in a way which it isn't here. I think that there needs to be somebody to get on the private members' bill ballots. So if the government won't do it, to bring up a bill to make a similar law exist.
Because there are traders
cash
now
is an important part of human freedom.
No, there are traders in this country, and there's some pubs as well in this country who won't take cash.
Lots of places.
I was unusually surprised, actually, the weekend. I was up in Scotland, and I got in a cab, and the guy said, look, I hope you got cash, because I only take cash.
Yeah, but
I can't remember the last time I heard that.
A lot of people think that the law in this country actually stipulates that people have to accept cash, but it doesn't. You have to accept it in settlement of a debt.
Yes.
But if you haven't contracted the debt, then you don't have to accept it. So the Legal Tender Act doesn't actually force them to do it. So if somebody puts up a notice saying we don't accept cash, then that's it. They're clear. They don't have to accept it.
Right. I remember
it needs to change.
Sometimes the difficulties of getting rid of some Scottish currency when you were in England, and even worse, Northern Irish.
Well, indeed,
pounds,
Northern
which
Irish
everybody thinks is just made up.
Thing to do.
They just go, that's not real.
But there was a quite an enjoyable period when you could still get Scottish pound notes and you couldn't get English ones.
Yes.
When I had a lot of Scottish pound notes,
Yeah.
people actually tended to accept them because pound notes are so convenient.
Yeah,
the Americans
absolutely.
still have the dollar bill.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting times. Well, listen, as ever, great to see you, Pete. Thank you very much indeed.